Thanks for being here today. This is a new talk for us, and it quite honestly could probably be a lot of separate talks with social media or video games or pornography or anything that comes with technology. Um, but hopefully, this is something that y'all find entertaining and engaging, and it's something that we can continue to bring out to the community through the schools or the churches, even businesses. I know there's a lot of questions and concerns around a lot of these things, and so this is just a high level talk about all these kind of different things. We don't go too far into it. Like I said, they could probably be their own talk, and we could probably go on and on about social media. So this is just giving you some of the high level information, obviously talking about some of the challenges that technology is bringing to us nowadays. Statistics, so you kind of understand some things are occurring while other things are occurring. You can draw your own conclusions if those things are causal or just corollary. Certainly the influences that can make this level of technology harder to put down and disengage from, how to build a system for you, your family, your school, whatever it may be, to kind of have a healthy relationship with technology, and then give you some tools that you can use to kind of disengage, and also some tools just for those that are caregivers to know how to operate your phone and set screen times and look at notifications and look at what they're on and how long they're on, that kind of stuff. So just giving you some very practical tools if you're an Android or an Apple user on how to go through and just set those things up for yourself or your family if you choose to. And just FYI, for those of you that are listening to the recording, my email will be at the end of the presentation, and that way you can send in messages that way, or even reach out if you want to do get a presentation set up for your school, your church, your business. The challenge is obviously is this stuff is everywhere, as you'll see here in a minute. The speed of change and how quickly things are innovating, particularly in kind of the areas of AI, and just technology, software, processing speeds, those kind of things. Just understanding some of the trade-offs. Obviously, these are not going away. They're becoming more and more present in our lives, and will continue to be more present in our lives. And just understanding some of the trade-offs when we make these decisions that we make and that your kids are making. And then the physical and virtual world, understanding the difference between those two things. I know it kind of says without saying, but obviously there's a lot of different things that go on in the physical world, and they're very different that go on in the virtual world. So just for clarity and understanding, more people have access to the internet than have access to clean running water in the world. These stats are for the United States, but obviously, if you're elementary, you got an elementary school kid, maybe even TK programs. There's obviously access to the internet, access to these devices. You maybe do it in different platforms, but the Google Chrome books. I don't know what age you get those now. My kids are a little bit older, but it is throughout the school system. It's throughout our lives, and so as you can see, it's a really high number. 97, 97, 95, 60% give smartphone access to their children under the age of 12. That number is important because there's a law that says, kids can't be on a social media platform at the age of 12. They have to be 13. And Instagram, for instance, has introduced that. You could say maybe at the pressure of legislators or parent groups, things like that, but it's not a law. It's just as far as what Instagram's doing. It is a law that you're not supposed to be on those platforms before you're the age of 13. It's obviously 60% of parents. That doesn't mean they're all getting on social media. It just means that they're giving them access to that phone, and that phone can take them to a lot of different places, many that their caregiver is not aware of. And as you can see, just big numbers, high numbers. Those numbers will continue to grow slightly. There's only so much room more they can grow. But it just means that we have access to this stuff. It's in our lives on a daily basis. The speed of change, I don't know how much y'all keep up with AI and the development in that place. I keep a close eye on it. We use the AI in our practice for a couple of different things as far as chatbots go. But the scale that it is climbing is just astronomical as far as what it could do 2 years ago versus what it can do now. That speed of change, most people think will continue to accelerate. And the idea of artificial general intelligence is just something that is more akin to someone that is able to operate at a higher level. So for instance, right now, the AIs at least are operating at a PhD level student. And so that's gone from a high school student to a PhD student in less than a year, as far as them getting trained, training these different models to act in certain ways. And so when you say AI, it's very broad. It can mean a lot of different things. It could be autonomous driving vehicles. It could be robots. It could be agents that are answering the phone. You've probably interacted with some of these, whether you knew it or not, with these systems. And so it's just a broad term. Like I said, we could have a whole discussion about this, but just understanding the implications and, and as I'll bring it up later on, what it may mean for your kiddos as far as career choices and things like that. If you've heard me talk before, just on average, new apps that come to market, 35 to 45,000. That's not a year, that's a month. And so you can just imagine that's impossible to keep up with unless you have some really good gatekeepers for your family or loved ones. And so those things are coming out all the time. And most of them have really good purposes and some of them don't. And so it's difficult to kind of know, it's impossible to keep up with it because every day, every minute, it's something new if you just want to think of it that way. And so your kids are probably more akin to it and understand it a lot quicker than you do. But it will go back towards the end of the talk. How do you have good gatekeepers around those things so you can decide what you let in, what they're on, what they're doing, how long they're doing it, that kind of stuff. Education, if you just look at education itself, just the proliferation of technology coming into the room is certainly very different than when I was in school. And even since my kids for reference are 17 and one's 19, so I've got a freshman in college and a junior in high school. There's just been a lot of change since they started school compared to now as far as education, what it looks like, and where this may be going. And how technology would be a part of that story and hopefully aid. I know, if I got any educators on there now, the big thing is, and it's been probably for the last year, is these large language models. How do you use them? Do you just say never ever and act like they're not going to proliferate into the systems, or how do you learn to work with them and hopefully put some good guardrails around them for what you can use them for, rather than it doing all the work for that student? And then compute and processing continues to grow. There's this thing called the Moore's Law, which just means it keeps doubling, keeps doubling, keeps doubling. And so if you just think of 5G, if you think when you first got your smartphone, how much quicker and how much more you can do now versus what you could then, that's all compute and processing. And that continues to improve and get faster and faster and faster. And so just all these things kind of come together and make it very dizzying, particularly for caregivers or educators, of like what to keep up with, how to keep up with it, and how to try to stay ahead of it, and not just feel like you're always trying to catch up to it. Um, Trade-offs. I mean, we also could probably go on and on about this, but just understanding the trade-offs, like wearable tech. I have a running watch. I could have it type in my messages and calls and stuff like that. I don't, but wearable tech obviously can be a very positive thing. I had a client who was prone to grand mal seizures, and the EKG reading on their watch would give them a reading to let them know they're about to have a seizure before they could feel it. And they drive, and so they could pull over and take care of themselves and do the things that they needed to do. So that's obviously incredible. I mean, we're getting to places where um, the Apple Watch just got approved to do a sleep apnea test. So wearable tech and the positives of that, even just kind of telling us what our resting heart rate is, and maybe if we're under stress, that kind of thing. Really, really cool stuff. As well as you can get messages and do all the things that that it's been doing. So that can be a very positive thing. It also can be a negative because there's some opportunity cost if you're just kind of like, doing this because you get notifications, you're getting calls, and it's not from the people you want or the time that you need it. Cost of savings for DIY, like can't tell you how many times I fixed my dryer or wash machine or dishwasher because I was able to pull up a YouTube video when instructing me how to do it, no cost to me. So this has saved me a lot of money just doing stuff around the house. I'm not like super duper handy, but I can usually follow instructions, and So it certainly saved me a dryer on 2 occasions. The remote, just being able to do this, obviously, everything that we went through with the pandemic, incredible, positive developments, just being able to see people FaceTime, those kind of things, those are great opportunities and privileges. The connectivity, telemedicine, we can do the virtual appointment, you can do teledoc.
So you can get it in a couple of minutes. So it's just lots and lots of good things. And then the negatives are, like I said, the opportunity cost. Sometimes if you're doing something from tech, there's a loss of opportunities. If you're doing something in the virtual space, maybe there's opportunity that you could have done it in the physical space. So that's also a change. Um, Time spent alone, as we'll kind of expand on, like more and more people, the loneliness I'm not going to call it a crisis. It gets called a crisis, but there are more and more people spending time alone. So there's ramifications for that, obviously. The digital divide, it means that all of us have 5G, not all of us have access to the newest and latest and the fastest. And even when it comes to this AI stuff, it's like, who's going to have access to it, who's not, and the ones that do, we're going to see an incremental growth much quicker than the rest of us. There has been a decline in institutions. There's a decline in civil discourse, as you can see day in, day out in the feeds that you follow. And sometimes the negative is, which could be a positive, you can get an answer really, really quick. Your kids, however they are the smartest generation. And this Gen Beta and then Gen Alpha, who, if you're just born January 1st, I think you're Gen Alpha, or excuse me, Gen Beta and Gen Alpha has preceded them. Um, these kids are going to have access to everything all the time. It's going to be in their glasses. It could be in their ear. Who knows? If it's Neuralink, it may be plugged into them as an interface. And so the ability to get that answer gives you a trade-off is sometimes you don't know how to dig into stuff when you need to. When everything's at the touch of a hand, you can get that answer right away. If it was like me back in the day, I had to go to the library. If you're lucky enough in encyclopedias, you could use encyclopedias as references, but those weren't updated all that often. And so there's trade-offs from getting it quicker, but also having it right at your fingertips. So then we've got the physical and virtual world. I would guess that most people that are going to listen to this would be uncomfortable if their kiddo went up to a house where they did not know that family or wander around a neighborhood that they've never been in before. But I also would probably guess that most caregivers do not know specifically where kids are going online. Even take a game like Roblox, they may not know what game they're playing. They certainly would not know the people that are in that game, just roaming around, maybe not playing, maybe they are playing. They don't know the ages of those people. And so it's these trade-offs of having access to these things, but also losing touch with some of the physical world. And so kind of going to that loneliness situation, and what we're seeing with, just kind of generalized social anxiety, the idea of how many conversations can you keep going at one time when it comes to text or Instagram, Snapchat, whatever it may be, DMs on TikTok, any of these things, right? They're overwhelming. And we have the idea that if our kids just kind of on this iPad or whatever doing their thing, that's in some ways they're safer than if we let them roam up the street. And inherently, that's not true. Most of if you think of like kidnappings and things like that, those things are down because they're spending more time in these virtual places than they are in the physical places. And so it's just a public service announcement that if you don't know where they're wandering in the virtual world, then you can't really keep tabs on them, particularly if you have young people. But also true for your tweens and teenagers as well. So as we'll see here in a minute, there's a lot of things going on, and you'll hear about a lot of these things going on in the world. And it's corollary. We can't do a true clinical trial, just like we, can't do a clinical trial with cigarettes and say, yes, this causes, because you can't do control people that smoke and control and versus people that don't smoke. So we're seeing a lot of these things occurring, right? We're seeing more car accidents. You can track that. We're seeing more cyberbullying. So maybe less bullying in physical world, but it's moved online to cyberbullying, which means, you have access to that situation 24/7. And then more process addiction. And we do have a process addiction talk coming out next month by Aaron Yearwood. Um, Decline in race perception of race relationships, obviously more loneliness, fear of missing out, that sleep, eye strain, and more sedentary lifestyle. And so as you see, when it comes to race relations, if you remember, the iPhone was introduced in 2007, but it really didn't get adopted, until 09, 10, 11. And so if there was another curve, it would be going up, which is iPhone or smartphone adoption, right? So these lines would intersect at some point, maybe 2014, 2015, 2016. You go back to now, like 97%. So the blue and red, the red is African American or Black Americans, and the blue is white Americans, non-Hispanic. And so if you just look back 05, 06, in these polls, large sample polls, you know, there was, of course, a disparity in what people thought, but the numbers were much higher than what they are now. And they continue to go down. And so you can draw your own conclusion. It doesn't mean that it was because of the smartphone. Maybe the smartphone gave us more access to information. Maybe it gave us more access to taking pictures. But when people are polled about, how often is this occurring, they're grossly overestimating how much is actually occurring, because you can go look at national crime statistics versus their perception of what it is. And so you could extrapolate this to many other things that are going on in the world as you relate it to depression, anxiety, all these kind of going back to look when the iPhone come around, and then look how these lines shoot up when things become more and more adopted. Doesn't mean it caused it, just means these two things are occurring at the same time. So you can see those numbers went up, in some instances sixfold, which is pretty staggering in a short amount of time when there's, other things in the world that hadn't changed all that much or to cause that shift. So you kind of go back and look at like, hey, what's going on? What are some of the potential things that are going on that could have created some of these outcomes? And so that's how you start distilling down that information. And then the last one, we'd most say, or hopefully almost all of us would say, like, great, alcohol, smoking, drug use, and teen pregnancy are down. And if you were here in a live audience, I'd say, all right, well, so what do you think that's about? Well, all those things usually imply, doing things together. And so since kids are spending less time together, they're doing less of these behaviors. And so those behaviors are not great behaviors. We'd want those all those numbers to come down, but that comes back to the trade-off. So they're spending more time alone or online in the virtual world with their friends, and so they're doing less of these behaviors. And then we see these other behaviors go up when it comes to anxiety, depression, and diagnosis of ADHD, those kind of things. So the influences, and we'll talk about all these in detail, is obviously social media. You draw your own conclusions. I'll give you some background on what the brain does and just naturally does, and that these technology companies have known for a long time and have kind of been leveraging these different systems because they employ the best. It doesn't matter if it's a neuroscientist, a psychologist, a behavior scientist, it doesn't matter. They understand how the brain works. They have fMRI machines, they have ways to test this and see what lights up, what doesn't, to know how to get action to move in the direction that they want it to move in. We'll talk about video games and pornography. So just for context, there's a lot of different hashtags. I just picked on mental health and trauma, just to see how many people are actually viewing that, watching that. Um, these other things probably go without saying, but teens who are heavy users are more depressed than light users, non-users, especially for girls. When it comes to social media, that social comparison, socially prescribed perfectionism, just for reference, socially prescribed perfectionism is the environment that you're in. And it says that you need to look, behave in a certain way, so it may not be something you feel internally, but the environment says you need to show up that way. There's for those heavy users, there's an 18.8% drop in body image satisfaction. It's a lot of social comparison stuff that you can imagine, especially with the apps and the ability to tune them to have you look, distort the way you actually look. And then 16.67 drop in satisfied with self. So your self-esteem is taking hits because of this exposure. And so for someone that has a high self-esteem, these things don't are not as impactful, but people that have some lower self-esteem, particularly tweens, and young teenagers who are more impressionable, it tends to hit them a little harder. So social media companies, the apps, they know what they're doing. They know how to push content to keep you engaged, as you'll see from some of the things that we've going to talk about, have talked about. Um, but they know how to keep you on the hook. Their business model at the moment is engagement and time on device. And so even if this is a pretty interesting thing. Like even if you're not on TikTok, if you have a friend that is on TikTok, TikTok has your social avatar data. All these companies have social avatar datas. They know your behavior, how you behave, and then they match that against algorithms that determine what are the best ways to keep you engaged with that platform. You know, um, all of us want to feel protected. All of us want to feel a part of a tribe, a group. And so in order to do that, you kind of put yourself out there a little bit, but you also are trying to prevent from standing out too much, which would get you kicked out of the group. So there's this fine line of what's okay, what's not okay, and the goal line is always moving. So it's like if you have kiddos, every class that they go into, there's a new norm, a new standard, a new definition of what is popular, what you should wear, how you should talk, what you should listen to, and it's changing constantly. So you can imagine how dizzying that is for your kids, and for us too, but particularly for them, because what is popular constantly changes. Back in our day, and I'll say back in my day, everything was pretty static. Trends moved, but they didn't move minute to minute. Certainly not hour to hour, day to day. It moved much slower as far as what to do, how to do it, what to say, how to say, what to dress, blah, blah, blah. And you just think how difficult it can be to keep up with all those things and all these kind of pockets when kids are trying just to kind of fit in. And so it's like, well, how to do that when this information is constantly changing. So, the things that have been well publicized, hopefully all y'all know that, bad news, even if it's not true, just moves 6 times quicker than good news. Really cool study that they did. They just posted a headline that was controversial in Facebook, and 70% of the people who forwarded the post never even opened the article. They just forwarded the post. Now, I think most of us do that at times and don't spend time reading the article, or reading or taking more time to think about it and find maybe counterpoint or things that continues support what it is you think or feel, because information is just moving so quickly and changing so quickly, that it's hard to kind of stay put and feel like you're up to date when there's so many things that it feels like there's to stay up to date on. That's you personally as an adult. Imagine what that's like for your kiddo. Um, and so the bad stuff just moves quicker. It's kind of just grease the tracks. So if you've heard me talk before about most any of my talks, I'll talk about the haunted house syndrome. So if you think as anyone, that you feel like you're in a haunted house because any moment in time something bad, negative could be said about you or posted about you. And so if you've had that experience, then you're more cued that, well, it could happen again, probably would happen again. So it can make you would imagine, somewhat anxious, because you feel like something's going to happen. You just don't know when, but you're pretty sure it will because it has. And so it just makes the world, the virtual world in particular, feel more dangerous, particularly if you have those experiences or you have that negative, not negative, but lower self-esteem. It just makes your nervous system, if you're like a 1 to 10, 10 is totally dysregulated, it's going to make that nervous system a 3 or 4, when you're on these platforms because you've had negative experiences on those platforms. And that just builds and scales, particularly if you're a young person. And then there's this idea called Dunbar's number. And if you just think, wasn't that long ago that we were not in big cities, in the relatively course and history of just human. We haven't been around in these really large pockets of people. Most of it was small groups, small tribes, all communities. And so what social media has done as it's kind of valued everyone the same and their comments and their ideas the same. Typically, If you have a good social circle, 5 to 15, these are the people that you can have real conversations with, maybe disagreements about, more nuanced conversations. They're not going to burn you, they're not going to leave you. You've put time and effort into that, and those people are solid. They're solid. And then you keep going out, keep going out, keep going out. These are, your friends, your acquaintances, people you recognize, sort of know, and then you can keep going, right? All the way out to people you don't know. Well, social media allows you to collect as many of those bubbles as you want. And in some instances, it's incentivized that the more you collect, the more popular you are, the more influence you could have, the more views you get. And it can be monetized, of course. If you get a really big bubble, you can start making money. The problem is that anyone in those bubbles can make comments that feels just like the 5 or like the 15. And so it makes you feel vulnerable or at ease or on ease, excuse me, when that comment is made. And inevitably you start getting that many people, let's just say it's 1,500, someone's going to have a negative thing to say, a negative thought. And when there is no friction to leaving that thought, saying that thing, you can just do it. The repercussions can be much greater than they should be for someone that you barely even know. And so you can imagine for kids whose kind of whole sole focus is to get friends and acquire numbers, they lose perspective of the 5 and the 15. They're kind of paying attention to total aggregate, not like who are my closest friends, who are my next closest friends. It kind of feels all the same in these social media platforms. So it gives equal weight to comments when it really should. But that's a very dizzying thing, particularly for a young person. So there's things that make sense. Like I said, these tech companies know this. When we are ostracized, particularly as a young person, it feels like real pain. It feels like someone kicking you in the leg. Problem is, like getting kicked in the leg, as long as you don't keep getting kicked, that pain will subside. But when you are being ostracized, it feels like that pain just gets elongated and carries on and carries on. And so the emotional and physical pain centers are right next to each other in the brain. That's why they feels like it is real pain when you're experiencing that emotional. That's like saying, when your kid comes, like, it's not a big deal. You just, it's just one person. You've got a bunch of other friends. To them, that one person felt very important. And going back to that other slide, if that one person is in the 500 or 1,500, it really, you're like, I don't even know who that is. And they barely know who it is, but whatever to them, it feels like it was part of that 5 or that 15 circle. Um, Generally, kids don't have the ability to reprise kind of third person perspective, have more empathy. Those neural networks are just not awakened. They certainly haven't been trained and practiced. That takes time, many, 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 many reps. Think about a kid that is learning to write for the first time or walk or whatever it may be. It takes a lot of reps to get good at these things and build these pathways out. And tweens don't really have the ability to do that. Teenagers barely have the ability to do that. And so that's just something that develops over time. So our expectation of them kind of thinking through things logically as adults is really compromised because they don't have the wherewithal and the networks to do that yet. And then this other part of our brain, which these social media companies know, that our brain lights up. We get dopamine when we have held someone accountable for doing something wrong. There's another part of your brain that lights up that makes you feel guilty, even if you didn't do something bad. If someone blames you for something, this part of your brain, unbeknownst to you, and there's it's spectrums, but it also feels guilt, right? So they know all this information, they know how to leverage that, play on that. So knowing that you're getting someone and holding them accountable can feel really good. Particularly when you do it online, when it's kind of a faceless interaction in a sense, you feel vindicated. And so it's a lot of stuff happening in the background. This idea of tribalism, we all want to be a part of the group. The brain lights up. There's a dedicated part of the brain that has a mob mentality. You just kind of think of peer pressure and it allows us to bond as a species, to find our people. That way we can take care of our tribe and defend our tribe and all these things. So these other areas of our brain light up and cause us to do some very interesting things, excuse me, cause us to do some very interesting things that otherwise we probably would not do, particularly when we're online. Most people are not going to get into that verbal altercation. I kind of akin it to most people don't cut in front of you in line. But if they're in a car, they feel like they can do that because they have a 2,000-pound vehicle and they'll just slide right in. Whereas these interactions that are online, most of those interactions aren't occur if you have two people kind of there together because it's a more human experience. And so these different things that are a part of us, who have always been a part of us, the tech companies know this and they know how to leverage those things so they work correctly for them. Then we got video games. And just at the lowest level, right? No problem, but just lowest level, video games can impose an opportunity cost. So it means that if you're playing a video game, it means you're also not doing something else. Inherently, that may not be bad, right? That's not necessarily a problem. It doesn't mean it's dysfunctional. It just means that it's taken away from doing something else that you probably could do. You know, playing a video game online with your friends, or if your kids are playing with their friends, particularly maybe they live in another town, another city, country, whatever, that can be a wonderful thing. And inherently, there's nothing wrong with it. Just other times, it can be something that is causing some dysfunction or some of the problem. Um, if you think about video games now, the sophistication of video games, and particularly the good video games, things that all kids want, they want some level of confidence and competence that what they're doing, they can be good at and get better at. They want some level of socialization, and then they want some level of agency. So take a game like Minecraft. Minecraft gives you agency because you can roam around wherever you want. You can hang out with other people, which is that social content, and then you can feel confident, right? You can forage for the things you need to do. You can defeat the enemies, and you apply that to any video game. Those are the best video games. Fortnite, Call of Duty, you name it. First-person shooters, even role-playing games. They give you agency or autonomy. They give you some way to usually connect with a community. There's special Reddits or special Discord channels all for these different games. And you start feeling competent and you gain status, right? So an 8-year-old could be better at something than a 20-year-old. And so that's huge status. Most places, an 8-year-old can't go and dominate a 20-year-old in anything. But when it takes to video games, you can. And so you can get really good at this stuff if you put a lot of time in. And then the status of like, well, I could be, this rank or that rank, and then that could turn into, I could start streaming this stuff and make some money and get some followers, that kind of stuff. And so, most people coming out of school now, or at least maybe middle school or high school, want to be influencers or video game professionals. There are those things. Still, it's just you have a better chance of making the NFL than you do becoming a professional video game player and making money at it. All games are built on a loop that are good. So you have the quest, you have the playing, you have the unpredictable rewards. Just think slot machine. You don't know when it's going to pay off. If you keep playing, eventually it will pay off. And then you can level up. And so, like I said before, all these things are key components when it comes to a good video game. Now, the trade-off is sometimes it creates something that is fun and turns it into something that's dysfunctional. So, you can think of these in four ways. You can think of addicted, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, problematic, engaged, so that's someone's playing, and maybe it's a little harder for them to get off. Problematic is the people that I don't want to get off, it's bedtime, I'm not going to bed. Casual players are people like time to come to dinner, they put it down, no big deal, ease out of these things and don't really have a high dopamine loss cause. So just thinking on this addiction scale, and it does scale, right? So preoccupation, so just spending a lot of time thinking about it. You start building up some tolerance, so that novelty is starting to wear off. You're starting to need something a little bit more to increase that novelty. Loss of control, that may be loss of control, keeping track of time, your emotions, your behavior, maybe you're breaking a controller or two. Withdrawal when you don't have it. So you're starting to feel a real neurochemical decline when you don't get that dopamine. Really cool studies that this place in the brain has when they study kids that have become addicted to video games, this place in the brain that call it like a channel where dopamine is going through the brain, it is actually widened for these individuals because there's so much dopamine coming through the channel that the pipe, in a sense, had to get bigger to account for all the dopamine. Um, that's worst case scenario. I think of like that's a drug addict. Then you're using video games to escape, neglect, which means you're neglecting all the things that you should be doing, or at least one of the things, if not all the things. And then deception, right? Lying, sneaking. I had a client a while ago. He called the internet company and got the internet switched to his email and made sure that the card on file stayed on file. So the parents didn't know that he had changed the email and changed the password so he could have unfettered access to their Wi-Fi. And so that's deception, right? I mean, and that those are a little bit more clear cut when it comes to that. Then we have porn. Just first perspective, this number's kind of loose. Like I've seen it anywhere from 9 to 11 for first exposure for porn. Just understanding the implications of porn, and this isn't just men or boys; it's also girls too. But the implications are what it's doing for that prefrontal cortex and the wiring of the brain when it comes to how it thinks about sex. Because when you watch porn, it needs to be novel, which it needs to be something new. It needs to be a new video or up the amplitude or whatever it may be. And so just for perspective, like porn right now is about 270 billion with a B in revenue, and they think in the next 10 years it's going to be over 700 billion in revenue. So it's very apparent and out there and easy to find. And so it just has huge implications for our young people when they get exposed to this at a young age and start using it at a young age. It obviously distorts what a healthy relationship is, what a healthy sexual relationship is. It can become a process addiction. So it's something that you do to avoid the pain of not doing it. It no longer becomes like a satisfaction thing. It just becomes this thing you need to do, so you don't feel the boredom and the discontent from not getting that dopamine. And then as like as you can imagine, lower interpersonal satisfaction. So just really having a hard time being with people in relationships and staying committed to those relationships because of all the things that go into the recipe of the brain when you get exposed to pornography at a young age. So just some guidelines for how to know if there's a problem. Obviously, constantly check on the device. There's ways to see how much they're checking the device, and then you kind of define if that's a problem or not. Neglecting some of those responsibilities, so maybe just kind of slumping off on some stuff. It could be chores, or maybe their grades are dropping a little bit. And there's not other things going on, obviously. More time away, more social isolation, more time with friends online than in person, whereas maybe they had a healthy relationship between virtual and physical worlds. Starting to see more of those mood swings around. It could be post, it could be just interactions, it could be the video game not going well, whatever it may be. Loss of interest, like we talked about, and other things, and it's not being replaced. Like a lot of, I'll just say boys, sometimes they lose interest in Legos, but it gets replaced with something. This is things are just falling off, and the device, call it video game console or phone or whatever, it's become more the predominant use of interest. Failed attempts to cut back, certainly seeing issues with sleep, phones in the room, video games are in the room, whatever it may be. So, up hours at night when they shouldn't be, and they're being more defensive and sneaky, like we talked about. I've had people come in and try to pick the lock in the middle of the night to get access so they could get on Roadblocks because that was their game of addiction. It wasn't just the internet itself or all games itself. It was a particular game in Roblox because that game, if they didn't play, it hurt their status and they would rank down, and that was just something that scared them. And this was a teenager. So, how to build a system, how to get more control over this stuff, have a healthy relationship with this stuff, and just teach good habits. So, all the adults, we're the model. If you're a caregiver, you're the model. If you have your phone at dinner, then telling them not to, that becomes a much harder proposition to enact. And it just looks hypocritical. Kids are really great at picking up on this stuff, the hypocrisies. But if you're there to watch them do something, make sure you have your full attention, and not looking at devices and things like that. We don't allow phones in our meetings. And if you're doing this, then we remove those things too because we want your full attention. So you're the model. Establish the oversight you need for each child. I'll akin it to like you may have one kid that's allergic to something, the other one's not. And so you may be making two meals. Like one kid could have a healthy relationship with this stuff, kind of move in and out. Another child may not. And we know that when you punish the child that's not doing something wrong, it sends a really bad signal, which turns into behavior over time and resentment and then acting out. So you want to make sure you're setting healthy boundaries for everybody. I know this is harder when it comes to a lot of these things, but you want to make sure that you're setting the boundaries for the child that needs those boundaries and giving more freedom to the child that doesn't. Identify the virtual environment that is appropriate for the age of your child. When I say Roblox, that is like telling me you went to Disney World and I have no idea where you went. I have no idea. Did you go to Magic Kingdom? Did you go to Epcot? Who'd you talk to? What rides were you on? What did you eat? Like, it is not enough information to say I'm going to go play Roblox. Depending on the age of your child, you need to know the games that they're playing, and the interactions within those games and the roles that they have in those games, the outcomes, the goals, whatever it may be. You got to monitor screen time, particularly when you're starting this adventure, any more than you wouldn't just go to the beach and let them go do whatever they want. You'd have pretty tight monitor on that. And over time, you can see that they can, distance and manage themselves and have more control. And then maybe they want to go to a new environment, and that's, a kind of a whole another step of like, all right, let's figure out this environment. What are the boundaries and limitations of this? What am I willing to let them do, not do, that kind of stuff. You may need to spot check apps and games from time to time. I would encourage you to certainly, just like you're going to go to a dance recital or a soccer match or whatever it may be, like sit down and watch them play. And not from a snooping standpoint, but just be a part of that. So you can watch them play. If you want to, you can play with them, whatever it may be. But just understanding those environments and the chats that they're having and the conversations they're having and what they follow, who they follow, that kind of stuff. Particularly when they're younger and getting a hold of these devices for the first time, it's setting a good precedent, that you're interested, while also understanding what it is that they're doing, how they're doing it, and who they're doing it with. And then transition time off. I can't say this enough, that you get a lot of dopamine when you're doing these things, particularly video games. And if bedtime's at 9 and you're asking them to get off at 8:59, you're going to experience a lot of friction because you've just now severed their dopamine. And so when you don't have dopamine, you have other things that are on board, which is cortisol and prolactin, and that creates a really bad cocktail of disagreement at minimum, but it could create, outburst and outlandish behavior. And so understanding how to come off that so it can be a slope rather than a cliff is really important. And sometimes that's just maybe starting that process sooner, so 30 minutes before bed. It's going back to, what can your kid handle? Can they handle that transition time? Do they need a little bit more transition time? What are the things that you can help them with as far as giving them some access to dopamine so they're not falling off that cliff? It's not going to be as good as playing the video game or maybe even watching TikTok or something like that. It's not supposed to be. But it's something that kind of fills the void of not having it until they can get to a place where they can get level set. It's important for us to work together, to have conversations, to be open and honest about, what we're doing, how we're doing it, where we're having struggles, so we can learn from each other. Um, it's like the parent says, I'm not going to give you a phone until you're 18. And the rest of the world got a phone when they're 13. It's going to be really hard for that kiddo to develop social relationships over time because they're not having access to the ways that most kids have social relationships. So just understanding these environments, how we interact in these environments, how we're acting as a community, as a society, those things, I think it's really important for us to have conversations. Learning information like today and sharing that information, is important. Individual, I think it's just really important to understand what's useful for you, what the trade-offs are for you. Do you need notifications all the time, or do you need notifications when your child is doing a particular thing and they need to get a hold of you? It's important to understand how, your use could be dysfunctional, certainly how it is signaling to people around you, your intention and your level of commitment to that moment. Looking at the frequency, duration, intensity to measure that dysfunction. So, how frequently is that behavior occurring? How long is it lasting? The intensity, how, like 1 to 10, is it a 10 and just complete dysregulation for you or a loved one? And just understanding that opportunity cost, doing something, there's a cost obviously for doing it and a trade-off, and that could be exactly what you want and what you need. But just understand if you're doing more of those things and if there's that cost. And getting feedback from people around you, so they understand and can see and give you feedback on what they see with your behavior. Healthy human recipe, this is in all our talks. If you're able to do these things, it just makes you better prepared to do the hard things, and help with transition times. But getting that exercise and movement, having play. There was something I just learned the other day, that if you do 1 minute of hard exercise, so at least like a really brisk walk where you're getting your heart rate up to like zone 2 or 3, it can add 5 minutes to your lifespan. So just doing these things on a daily basis makes life easier for you. Um, and it makes it easier to handle when there's challenges that come our way, which they always do. Sleep, as you can imagine,
Yeah, I had a tough day. It's only 9 o'clock. Well, I don't argue.
if you listen to my talks, I'm always going to talk about healthy habits, and certainly sleep is the foundation for all that. Making sure that your kiddos, your loved ones are getting the right amount of sleep, trying to go to bed at the same time, get up at the same time, just helps the brain clear all its trash. It helps it remember all the things that it learned from the day before. Because if it doesn't get encased and downloaded correctly, which makes it more challenging the next day. That exercise 2 hours before bed, kind of think about like not just exercise, but what are you doing that's requiring great focus? And you may not want to do that 2 hours before bed because you may say, well, I went to bed and slept fine. You're not seeing the implications to the different neurochemicals that need to be on board for you to fall asleep and stay asleep and have a good night's sleep. And then, set the temperature to 64 to 67, which is no problem this week, is it? As cold as it is. So just some tools. There are so many tools. Oops, sorry. So many tools. But these are some, and then there's Circle and things like that. This is just ways to monitor that screen time, and know what your kids are up to, where they're going, the environments they're in. Chunk your notifications for yourself or maybe for your kids. Most people don't chunk their notifications. 70% of us never touch them. But decide when you want them, rather than them just sending it to you all the time. Um, Careful of that infinite scroll, which means you can just kind of keep going on forever. You can set parameters in YouTube and these different platforms that will allow you to kind of hit the bar, hit the bottom, just to re-engage your brain of like, oh, I've been doing this. Most people don't realize how much time they're spending on. Whenever we ask, like, hey, what do you think your screen time is? How many notifications, that kind of stuff? Most people grossly underestimate how much they're on these devices. Have another dopamine option, like I talked about, other than the phone or the game system, that kind of thing. Have some other things that you can do, engage in. Try to set up those breaks. Instagram now, if you've got teenagers, that's what they do. They come and say, "Hey, do you want to take a break? You've been on the device for, you've been on the platform for 2 hours or 30 minutes or whatever." There's plenty of apps that will tell you like, hey, you need to go take a break. And you can either just download those for free. You just kind of do a Google search, they'll populate. And then have somebody, at least one person or a group of people that you're trying to be accountable to with a goal in mind of how much time you want to spend on these devices. So I'm not going to go through a lot of this. I'm just going to share the presentation with you because this would probably be another 30 minutes. But just know this is in here. So you can set up if you are an Apple user, you can set up those parental controls. Everything is going to go through screen time. You can restrict content through that. You can set the app limits is what you want as far as you want. Example, 1 hour per day, depending on that app. You also can make sure, kind of going back to those gatekeepers, you can make sure that nothing is downloaded until you approve it. And then you can obviously monitor that usage, and you can put parameters on how much they can use, those kind of things. And then the same is true if you're an Android user. There's more Android users than there are Apple users by far. So just kind of same deal, slightly different directions, but it's giving you the same access to set those controls, set that screen time, set that content restriction, to give you access to all that information and have better eyes on where they're going, what they're doing, who they're doing it with. This is our Healthy Human Recipe. This is our AI chatbot, one of the ones that we built. Just gives you really good access to information about exercises, places you can work out, social playgrounds, activities, hobbies, things that you'd like to do, trying to find people that you can do them with, ideas around sleep, how to get good sleep, how to get better sleep, what is healthy. There is no perfect diet on when it comes to eating to be healthy, but just giving you access to really good high level information, a lot of stuff that I talk about on a daily basis. You just need to scan that QR code. It will give you access to that chatbot. You will need to have an OpenAI account. Those are free, and it'll give you access to that information. Sign up for our newsletter. I imagine most of the people on here get that newsletter. That's how you heard about today's talk. But we send out a newsletter once or twice a month. We do have, like I said, that mentioned that talk with Aaron doing his debut talk on process addiction coming up in February. So it will kind of build on a lot of the themes that we talked about here and what it really looks like if something's gone wrong as far as addiction goes and help you give you more distilled information of like what's an addiction versus what's not, in case you need to move in direction of getting help or care if it has become truly dysfunctional. And then this is the QR code for the presentation today. Hopefully that works. You can just scan that or give you that Canva access. We will send this out after this is through recording and it's been downloaded. We'll send that out. Kelly will send that out through the normal channels, so you'll have access to this after the fact too. And then that's us. So anybody that's listening to the recording, you can send an email to lmbcounseling@lmbcounseling.net. If you ever want to do a presentation, have us come out and do a presentation, your school, your church, your business, you just go to lmbcounseling.net. Over in the right-hand side, it says schedule a presentation. It'll give you an access to a bunch of different talks that we are doing that have available to you. And we love going out to the community. We have a goal of doing 50 this year. So far, we've done 5. So we would love to give 50 talks out in the community just to give away, really good information. But if anybody that's on the call has a question, feel free to put it in the chat or you can unmute and ask the question that way if you want. You're welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for showing up. I know it's sometimes an inconvenience. I know we've got some educators in here and school personnel. So I appreciate y'all being here and hope everyone has a nice, warm week and stays warm. And just be on the lookout for the next talk that we have coming up. Right? Well, take care.